Tonight's story begins with something simple, yet unsettling. Some of the greatest structures on Earth stand in silence. They are measured, aligned, and engineered with care, yet they do not explain themselves. Egypt's monuments rise from stone, not from words. Names appear later. Records arrive after the work is already done. What came before remains unspoken. This video explores that silence, not as a mystery to solve, but as a condition to observe. We will move slowly through Egypt's earliest structures, its shifting timelines, its inherited landscapes, and the gaps where explanation fades. There are no dramatic revelations here, only patterns, only continuity without memory, only stone that endures longer than certainty. As you listen, allow the questions to remain open. History does not always resolve itself. Sometimes it simply waits. The empire without ink. History usually survives through marks, clay tablets pressed with reeds, stone walls cut with names, papyrus rolled and stored. When these are missing, historians assume absence. Small groups leave little trace. Short-lived societies fade. Empires, by contrast, are expected to speak loudly. They collect taxes, issue orders, record victories. They write because administration demands memory. Yet there are places where scale exists without language. Across parts of North Africa and the Eastern Mediterranean, infrastructure appears before writing does. Roads align across long distances. Quarries are emptied with consistency. Stone blocks weighing several tons are moved, placed, and fitted with precision. The work implies planning beyond a single season. It implies continuity. Still, the record is silent. In Egypt, the earliest dynasties left names, dates, and lists. Kings recorded offerings. Officials carved titles. Priests counted years. But beneath this documented layer, structures already stood. Some were reused, others were repaired, a few were avoided. Their builders were never named. The Great Pyramid at Giza was attributed to Khufu around 2600 BCE. His name appears in cartouches on nearby monuments. Yet inside the pyramid itself, inscriptions are absent. No dedication. No funerary texts. No reliefs. The walls remain bare. This absence was noticed early. In 820 CE, the Abbasid Caliph al-Ma'mun ordered a tunnel cut into the pyramid. His men found no body, no treasure, no writing, only stone and empty chambers. The lack of text does not prove foreign origin, but it raises a question. Why would a civilization that recorded nearly everything leave its most ambitious structure unmarked? One explanation is chronology. Writing in Egypt developed gradually. The earliest hieroglyphs appear around 3200 BCE, used mainly for labels and ownership. Full narrative texts came later. If a large-scale society existed before writing became central, its works might survive without explanation. Archaeology shows that organized life in the Nile Valley predates dynastic Egypt by thousands of years. Sites like Nabta Playa, dated to at least 5000 BCE, contain stone circles aligned to celestial events. These alignments required observation over generations. No writing accompanies them. No names survive. Farther north, massive underground chambers exist beneath later temples. Some were cut, then sealed, then reopened centuries later. Tool marks differ between phases. The earliest cuts are deeper, smoother, and more consistent. Later work appears cruder, even when made with better metal tools. This pattern appears elsewhere. At Baalbek in Lebanon, the trilithon stones weigh over 800 tons each. Roman builders incorporated them into a temple platform, yet Roman texts do not explain how they were quarried or moved. The stones were already there when the Romans arrived. They were reused, not originated. Recycling implies inheritance. If a prior empire existed, its power may not have relied on writing. authority does not require ink. It can be enforced through ritual, memory, and repetition. Oral systems preserve laws and techniques with surprising accuracy. In some cultures, genealogies spanning hundreds of years are memorized and recited without error. Writing often emerges when societies grow too complex to remember internally. Before that threshold, memory functions as archive. A civilization based on oral transmission would leave few records. When it collapsed, its knowledge would vanish with its people. Stone would remain, alignment would remain, scale would remain. Explanation would not. There are odd absences in the historical record that support this possibility. The Sumerian king list, compiled around 2100 BCE, names kings who ruled for tens of thousands of years before a great flood. Modern scholars interpret these as myth, yet the list insists these reigns were real, simply earlier. Plato, writing in the 4th century BCE, described an ancient power in the Critias and Timaeus dialogues. He claimed it existed 9,000 years before his time and left no trace except memory preserved by priests. His source was Egyptian. Plato emphasized that Greek history was young compared to what the Egyptians remembered. In one passage, an Egyptian priest tells Solon, "You Greeks are always children. You have no old belief handed down by ancient tradition, nor any science which is hoary with age." The statement suggests loss rather than absence. If a great empire collapsed before writing became common, later civilizations might misinterpret what they found. They would assign credit to known kings. They would retrofit dates. They would explain gaps as symbolism or ritual. In Egypt, this may have happened repeatedly. Temples were built atop older temples. Shrines were aligned to earlier foundations. Sacred geography remained fixed while theology changed. The land remembered even when language did not. Material evidence supports long continuity. Stone erosion on the Sphinx suggests heavy rainfall, inconsistent with Egypt's climate after 3000 BCE. Geological studies by Robert Schoch in the 1990 seconds proposed that the Sphinx body was weathered by water thousands of years earlier. The head, less eroded, appears reworked. If correct, this implies inheritance. A monument reshaped by a later culture, adapted to new beliefs while preserving an older core. Why would such a civilization leave no records deliberately? One answer is function. Writing may not have served its needs. Another is fragility. Organic materials decay. Papyrus rots. Wood burns. Clay tablets survive only if fired or buried. A coastal or riverine empire could lose its archives to floods, shifts in climate, or slow neglect. There is also the possibility of intention. Knowledge can be restricted. Some societies limit what is recorded, reserving truth for initiates. In such systems, silence is protection. The absence of text is not ignorance, but control. Egyptian religion itself valued secrecy. Certain rituals were never written. Names of gods were concealed. To know a name was to hold power. Silence preserved balance. If Egypt inherited its greatest works, it may have inherited this philosophy as well. Preserve the structure, forget the maker. This idea changes how absence is read. Instead of asking why there are no records, the question becomes whose memory failed. Civilizations do not vanish instantly, they fragment. Skills pass unevenly. Meanings shift. By the time writing became central, the builders were already gone. Stone does not explain itself, it waits. The architecture that refused to explain itself. Across Egypt, certain structures do not behave like ordinary buildings. They resist explanation not through mystery, but through precision. Their dimensions are consistent, their alignment is stable, their construction follows rules that are never stated. When later Egyptians encountered these forms, they treated them with care rather than confidence. They repaired them, they adapted them, they rarely altered their core. At Giza, The three main pyramids align closely with the cardinal directions. The Great Pyramid is oriented to true north, with an error of less than 4 arc minutes. This accuracy is difficult to achieve, even with modern instruments. No surviving Egyptian text explains the method used. No manual survives. No diagram exists. Later, Egyptians were skilled surveyors. They measured land after floods. They aligned temples to solstices and stars. Yet none of their texts describe how to orient a structure of this size so precisely. The silence is consistent. The pyramid's internal layout deepens the problem. The ascending and descending passages intersect at exact angles. The grand gallery rises with a constant slope. Chambers are placed with deliberate spacing, not stacked for convenience. Stress relief chambers above the king's chamber distribute weight using layered granite beams, each positioned with care. Granite is not native to Giza. It comes from Aswan, over 800 kilometers south. Each block weighs between 40 and 70 tons. Transporting them required coordination across river, land, and time. The method is not recorded. Later, Egyptians transported stone, but on a smaller scale and with more visible infrastructure. The pyramid does not show signs of trial and error. There are no abandoned ramps nearby, no partial chambers, no corrections carved into stone. The plan appears complete from the beginning. Other sites show similar restraint. The Valley Temple near the Sphinx uses massive limestone blocks fitted so closely that a blade cannot pass between them. The walls are smooth, squared, and heavy. Later editions use smaller stones and mortar. The difference is visible. At Saqqara, beneath the step pyramid of Djoser, a network of tunnels extends for kilometers. Blue faience tiles line the walls, imitating reed mats. The tiles are uniform. Their placement is consistent, yet the tunnels lead nowhere. They do not store goods. They do not house bodies. Their purpose is symbolic or structural, but no explanation survives. Djoser's architect, Imhotep, is named in later texts. He is credited with innovation, yet even here the underground complex shows signs of adaptation rather than invention. Some chambers were sealed before use. Others were expanded without explanation. Moving south, the Osirian at Abydos sits below ground level, built of massive granite blocks arranged around a central basin. Egyptologists date it to the reign of Seti I, around 1300 BCE, based on nearby inscriptions. Yet the structure itself bears no inscriptions. Its style differs from surrounding temples. Its floor lies below the water table, suggesting it was not designed for the climate of that period. Water seeps into the Osirian constantly. This was true even in antiquity. A structure designed during a dry phase would not account for this. A structure inherited might accept it. The same pattern appears at Karnak. Beneath later pylons, earlier foundations exist. Some are deeper. Some are misaligned with later axes. Builders respected these foundations, building around them rather than replacing them. This behavior implies reverence without understanding. You do not dismantle what you cannot replicate. Egyptian texts speak often of restoration. Kings claim to renew what was fallen or raise again what was in ruin. They present themselves as caretakers of ancient works. The phrase time immemorial appears repeatedly, referring to periods beyond memory. In one inscription, Thutmose III states that he restored monuments whose creators were unknown. He does not speculate. He records the act, not the origin. Architectural continuity does not require cultural continuity. A later society can inherit forms without inheriting methods. Over generations, imitation replaces knowledge, scale reduces, materials change. Precision fades. This decline is visible. After the Old Kingdom, pyramid construction becomes less exact. Cores are filled with rubble. Angles vary. Internal chambers simplify. By the Middle Kingdom, pyramids are smaller and often collapse. The ambition remains. The ability does not. If Egypt had invented pyramid construction from scratch, improvement would be expected over time. Instead, the earliest examples are the most refined. This reversal suggests inheritance. Elsewhere, similar patterns exist. In Peru, Inca walls are built atop earlier megalithic foundations. The lower stones are massive and polygonal, fitted without mortar. Upper stones are smaller and rectangular. The Inca respected the older work, incorporating it into their cities. In Egypt, the reuse is quieter but consistent. Sacred locations remain fixed. Orientation persists. Measurements echo older proportions. Numbers recur without explanation. The Great Pyramid's base perimeter, divided by twice its height, approximates pi. The structure's latitude mirrors the speed of light when expressed in meters per second. These relationships may be coincidence. They may also reflect a system of measurement lost to time. No Egyptian text discusses these values in architectural terms. Mathematics survives in papyri, like the Rhind mathematical papyrus, dated around 1650 BCE. It shows practical arithmetic, not abstract geometry. The pyramid exceeds what these texts describe. This gap matters. Architecture is frozen knowledge. It reflects what a society can do without needing to explain it later. When the explanation is gone, only the result remains. If the greatest empire left no records, its buildings would speak alone. They would show order without language, intention without instruction, mastery without memory. Later cultures would walk through these spaces, assign names, and build stories. They would honor what they could not repeat. Stone would endure. Words would not. Tools that should not have been enough. When archaeologists reconstruct the past, they begin with tools. Stone marks reveal hardness. Grooves reveal motion. Debris reveals sequence. In Egypt, this method creates a quiet contradiction. The surviving tools appear simple. The surviving stonework appears advanced. The two do not align comfortably. Egyptian toolkits from the Old Kingdom are well documented. Copper chisels, dolerite pounders, wooden mallets, abrasive sand. These implements were effective for limestone and softstone. They were not designed for granite, diorite, or basalt. Yet these materials appear frequently in early monumental work. Granite is especially resistant. On the Mohs scale, it ranks higher than copper. Cutting granite with copper alone requires abrasion, not slicing. This process is slow and imprecise. Experimental archaeology has shown that shaping granite with copper tools and sand is possible, but the results differ from what is observed at Giza and Aswan. Granite blocks in the king's chamber are cut with flat surfaces and sharp internal angles. Drill holes found in granite cores, studied by Flinders Petrie in the late 19th century, show spiral striations with consistent spacing. Petrie calculated that the drills advanced at a rate faster than what hand-powered copper drills could achieve. He did not offer a conclusion, he simply recorded the measurements. At Aswan, an unfinished obelisk lies abandoned in the quarry. It weighs an estimated 1,200 tons. Tool marks cover its surface. Some are broad and shallow, consistent with pounding. Others are smooth and linear, inconsistent with known chiseling methods. The obelisk was cracked before removal, left in place. Its scale implies confidence. The builders expected to move it. No record explains how. Later, Egyptian obelisks were smaller. Roman engineers transported several to Europe using elaborate ships and cranes. They documented the process. Egypt did not. The earlier, larger examples remain unexplained. Stone vases from the early dynastic period deepen the problem. These vessels, carved from hard stone, have thin walls and perfect symmetry. Some are less than 2 millimeters thick. Their interiors are smooth. Their lips are uniform. Thousands were found beneath the step pyramid complex, sealed in underground galleries. The precision suggests rotational shaping. Yet no lathes survive from this period. No illustrations show such devices. Later, Egyptians depicted workshops in tomb reliefs, showing carpentry, metalworking, and stone carving. Rotational stone shaping is absent. The vessels appear early, then disappear. Later periods produced fewer and cruder examples. The skill was not maintained. Drilling marks appear in multiple contexts. Core holes extracted from granite show tubular drilling rather than pecking. The cores themselves are straight and consistent. The drill bits required to produce this would need hardness exceeding copper or a method not preserved. Modern explanations rely on patience and labor. Given enough time, any stone can be shaped. This is true in principle, but time leaves traces, irregularities, deviations, corrections. Many Egyptian granite surfaces show none. They appear planned rather than adjusted. The same pattern is visible in saw marks. Petrie documented saw cuts in granite that implied blade widths of several millimeters, producing straight, deep channels. Copper saws would deform under such pressure. Stone blades would fracture, yet the cuts remain. No Egyptian text describes advanced stoneworking methods. The Rind papyrus includes geometry problems related to grain storage and land measurement. It does not mention drilling granite. No instructional texts survive. No apprentices are shown learning such techniques. This absence matters because Egyptian culture documented skilled labor extensively. Titles such as overseer of stonecutters appear in inscriptions. Teams are named. Workers' villages, like Deir el-Medina, preserve daily life in detail. Yet the most demanding techniques remain unmentioned. One explanation is loss. Knowledge can disappear if not transmitted. Another is restriction. Certain methods may have been reserved for specialists whose practices were not recorded publicly. A third is inheritance. The tools visible archaeologically may represent maintenance rather than origin. Later, Egyptians reused granite blocks. They repolished surfaces. They drilled new holes. These actions required tools. But reworking is not the same as first shaping. Maintenance can be achieved with less precision than creation. Evidence of tool evolution supports decline rather than progress. Early stonework is often more precise than later examples. This reverses the expected pattern of technological development. At Giza, casing stones once covered the pyramids. They were cut so tightly that seams were nearly invisible. When these stones were removed in later periods, the remaining core appears rough. The refinement was external, deliberate, and early. Egyptian inscriptions celebrate innovation rarely. They emphasize continuity. Kings present themselves as restorers of balance, not inventors. When something new appears, it is often framed as a return to an older, purer form. This language suggests memory of loss. Outside Egypt, similar contradictions appear. In Malta, megalithic temples predate metal tools. In Bolivia, Tiwanaku stones show precision beyond local metallurgy. In Turkey, Göbekli Tepe predates agriculture, yet displays organized stone carving. These sites share a trait. They emerge fully formed. They decline. They leave no instructions. Tools usually survive when civilizations collapse. Stone tools endure. Metal corrodes but leaves traces. Wood decays but leaves impressions. In the case of early high-precision stonework, the tools are either absent or insufficient. If the greatest empire left no records, its tools may have vanished with it. Portable technologies disappear first. Knowledge carried in practice disappears when practitioners die. What remains is stone shaped beyond explanation. Archaeology names cultures based on material remains. When tools do not match results, classification falters. The safest assumption becomes gradual development, but evidence does not always follow safety. Stone remembers force. It records direction, pressure, and repetition. In Egypt, stone records a skill that later Egyptians respected but did not repeat. The tools that should not have been enough leave a quiet gap in history. A timeline that runs backward. Historical timelines usually move in one direction. Early work is simple, later work becomes refined, skills accumulate, methods improve, mistakes are corrected. In Egypt, this pattern does not hold consistently. When monuments are arranged by date, an unusual sequence appears. The earliest large constructions show the greatest precision. Later ones become smaller, less exact, and structurally weaker. This reversal is not subtle. It appears repeatedly across centuries of building activity. The Great Pyramid, dated to around 2600 BCE, remains the most accurately aligned and carefully built stone structure in Egypt. Its casing stones were cut to fit within fractions of a millimeter. Its internal passages follow fixed angles with minimal deviation. Its base is level to within a few centimeters across hundreds of meters. No later pyramid equals this standard in accuracy, consistency, or internal complexity. The pyramid does not display evidence of trial and error. There are no visible corrections to its layout. Passages do not shift abruptly. Chambers are not recut. The design appears fully realized before construction began. This suggests planning that did not rely on experimentation. The builders knew the outcome in advance. The pyramids built after Khufu show decline rather than improvement. Khafre's pyramid is slightly smaller and relies more heavily on bedrock for its core. Menkaur's pyramid is smaller still, with less refined internal construction. By the 5th dynasty, pyramid cores are filled with rubble and mud brick rather than carefully placed stone. Casings are thinner. Internal chambers collapse more frequently. Structural confidence fades. This shift is not explained in texts. Egyptian records from these periods describe prosperity, divine favor, and continuity. Kings claim to maintain order and stability. There is no mention of lost knowledge. No lament for vanished techniques. No acknowledgement of decline. Yet the stone itself records change clearly. The same reversal appears in mortuary complexes. Early temples use massive limestone blocks fitted tightly without mortar. Walls are straight. Floors are level. Later temples rely increasingly on smaller stones and binding material. Mortar becomes common. Relief carving becomes shallower. Wall alignment grows less exact. Decorative detail increases as structural precision decreases. Underground structures follow a similar pattern. The subterranean chambers beneath the step pyramid at Saqqara are extensive, precise, and symbolic. Corridors stretch for long distances. Niches are evenly spaced. Walls are lined with carefully placed tiles. Later burial shafts are simpler. Tunnel networks shorten. Decoration replaces scale. Complexity retreats inward. If pyramid construction were an Egyptian invention developed over time, early attempts would be expected to show experimentation. Foundations would shift. Angles would vary widely. Internal chambers would be redesigned mid-construction. Evidence of correction would appear. Instead, the earliest examples appear confident, measured, and complete. One explanation is resource strain. Large-scale building requires labor, organization, and surplus. As political conditions changed, the state may have lacked the ability to support such projects. Yet this does not account for loss of precision. Smaller projects can still be built accurately. Precision does not require size, it requires method. Another explanation is religious change. Perhaps later beliefs required different structures, yet many later pyramids attempted to imitate earlier forms while failing to achieve their quality. The intent remained. The execution changed. Builders knew what they wanted, but could not fully reproduce it. Egyptian texts from the Middle Kingdom, and later often speak of a golden age in the distant past. The Old Kingdom was remembered as a time of balance and completeness. This memory may reflect more than politics. It may reflect technical capacity that no longer existed. The idea of a backward-running timeline is uncomfortable because it challenges progress. It suggests that some knowledge was present early, then lost. Loss implies vulnerability. It implies that civilizations can forget as easily as they learn. Stability is not permanent. Skill does not automatically accumulate. Evidence of forgetting appears in construction errors. Some later pyramids show misaligned passages. Others collapsed during or shortly after completion. Repairs were attempted, then abandoned. These are not signs of experimentation. They are signs of imitation without full understanding. The Medum pyramid illustrates this clearly. Initially built as a step pyramid, it was later converted into a true pyramid. The outer casing collapsed, leaving only the core. The failure suggests miscalculation of weight distribution. Earlier pyramids did not suffer this problem. Builders at Medum copied form without mastering load management. If builders were learning, Medum would represent progress. Instead, it represents regression. Knowledge that once existed had become incomplete. Methods survived as shapes, not as principles. The same pattern extends beyond pyramids. Early stone statues show balanced proportions and smooth surfaces. Symmetry is consistent. Later statues exaggerate features or simplify forms. Craft traditions survive, but their peak lies earlier. Skill narrows rather than expands. Metalworking follows a similar arc. Copper tools appear early and persist with little change for centuries. Bronze arrives later, but does not significantly alter stone construction quality. Iron appears much later and is rarely used in monumental building. New materials do not restore old precision. Technological stagnation combined with architectural decline suggests reliance on inherited templates rather than innovation. When templates erode, results degrade. Builders repeat shapes without understanding why those shapes once worked. This backward movement is not unique to Egypt. In Mesopotamia, early ziggurats were built on massive platforms. Later ones were smaller and repaired frequently. In the Indus Valley, early cities show advanced drainage systems that later settlements abandoned. In Central America, early ceremonial centers precede written language. In each case, complexity appears early, then fragments. The pattern does not require catastrophe. It requires time without transmission. A civilization that leaves no records would be invisible in texts but visible in sequences. Its presence would be inferred from discontinuity. Its decline would appear as confusion rather than collapse. Egyptian chronology relies heavily on king lists and inscriptions. These lists begin with dynastic founders. What came before is labeled pre-dynastic or mythic. Yet pre-dynastic sites show organized settlements, trade networks, and ritual architecture. The label hides continuity. The line between myth and memory blurs. Stories of gods ruling before kings may encode periods that lacked writing. Authority existed, order existed, names did not endure. The Sumerian king list names antediluvian kings with reigns lasting thousands of years. While not literal, the list insists on continuity before catastrophe. Egypt also speaks of a time when gods ruled directly. Later, kings inherited authority rather than creating it. If early monuments were built during a period remembered only symbolically, later Egyptians may have lacked direct knowledge of their origin. They would treat them as sacred inheritances rather than inventions. This would explain careful preservation without explanation. Structures were respected because they were old, not because they were understood. A backward-running timeline reframes absence. Instead of missing beginnings, it suggests missing endings. The empire did not fail to record itself. It ended before recording mattered. Writing freezes events. Without it, history flows until it breaks. When Egypt began writing extensively, it documented what remained, not what was lost. The earliest texts describe a world already old. Gods had acted. Structures stood. Order existed. The monuments did not announce their builders. They assumed memory. Stone lasts longer than certainty. Memory without writing. Complex societies are often assumed to require writing. Laws must be written down. Taxes must be recorded. Knowledge must be stored. Without text, it is believed, scale collapses. Authority weakens. Memory fades. Yet archaeology and anthropology suggest a quieter reality. Writing is not the beginning of complexity. It is often the result of it. Before writing, memory carried structure. Knowledge lived in people, not objects. Instructions were repeated, not archived. Authority was embodied rather than documented. In such systems, forgetting was not gradual, it was sudden. In Egypt, the earliest extensive writing appears after large-scale organization was already present. Irrigation systems existed. Labor was coordinated. Stone was quarried, transported, and assembled. These activities require planning across seasons and generations. They do not require ink. Oral societies develop methods to preserve accuracy. Repetition fixes detail. Ritual stabilizes sequence. Roles are inherited alongside information. A builder learns not from diagrams, but from observation and correction. A priest memorizes calendars, chants, and star cycles through recitation. Memory becomes infrastructure. This kind of transmission is fragile. It depends on continuity. When populations disperse, when specialists die without replacement, when rituals break, knowledge collapses quickly. There is no archive to recover. Silence follows. Egyptian culture retained traces of this system even after writing emerged. Many rituals were never written down. Certain names of gods were concealed. Some spells were spoken but not recorded. Knowledge was stratified. Writing was selective. This selectivity matters. The absence of records does not always indicate absence of knowledge. It may indicate restriction. Sacred or technical information may have been preserved orally long after writing became available. The earliest Egyptian texts focus on ownership, offerings, and names. They do not explain how structures were built. They do not record techniques. They list outcomes, not processes. This suggests that building knowledge was already established and did not require explanation. Oral transmission works best when environments are stable. The Nile flooded predictably. Seasons repeated. Social roles persisted. In such conditions, memory could span centuries without text. Problems arise when stability breaks. Climate data indicates fluctuations around the end of the Old Kingdom. Nile floods became irregular. Political unity fractured. Regional power replaced centralized authority. When this happened, oral chains weakened. Specialists were no longer supported. Knowledge became localized or vanished. Writing expanded during these periods. The Middle Kingdom produced instructional texts, moral teachings, and administrative manuals. Writing filled gaps left by broken memory. It did not preserve the past. It replaced it. This sequence is important. Writing did not accompany the greatest achievements. It followed their decline. In oral systems, history is preserved through narrative rather than chronology. Events are remembered for meaning, not date. When meaning fades, stories become symbolic. Gods replace people. Time stretches. Egyptian mythology reflects this transformation. Early periods are described as ages when gods ruled directly. Later kings are framed as successors, not founders. Authority is inherited from a past that is never fully described. This is consistent with memory without writing. When details are lost, status remains. Structures stand, rituals continue. Explanations simplify. Physical evidence supports this. Some monuments were clearly revered long after their construction. Temples were aligned to earlier foundations. Sacred geography remained fixed even when theology changed. Memory persisted spatially rather than textually. Oral memory also explains consistency without documentation. Certain proportions repeat across sites. Certain orientations persist. These patterns do not require written plans. They require tradition. Once tradition breaks, replication degrades. Builders remember shapes but not reasons. Proportions drift. Precision fades. This pattern appears in later Egyptian construction. Forms remain familiar. Quality declines. Decoration increases as structure weakens. Symbol replaces function. Outside Egypt, oral memory explains similar gaps. In Polynesia, navigation across thousands of kilometers was achieved without written maps. Star paths, wave patterns, and bird behavior were memorized. When transmission failed, routes were lost within generations. In West Africa, legal systems operated through spoken precedent. Judges memorized cases. When colonial disruption broke these systems, law vanished quickly. Oral systems are efficient but brittle. If the greatest empire left no records, its collapse would not leave ruins alone. It would leave confusion. Later societies would inherit works they could not fully explain. They would preserve forms while forgetting origins. Egyptian priests often described themselves as keepers of ancient knowledge. Yet their texts rarely explain that knowledge. They assert continuity without detail. This suggests reverence rather than comprehension. Plato's account of Egyptian priests criticizing Greek forgetfulness reflects this worldview. The priests claimed long memory, yet even they spoke of lost cycles and destroyed ages. Memory had limits. In Egypt, memory appears layered. Recent kings were recorded. Distant ages were mythologized. Before that lay silence. This silence may mark the boundary of oral collapse. When writing became dominant, it froze the present. It did not recover the past. What was already forgotten could not be restored. This explains why Egypt's earliest texts describe a world already structured. Gods had acted. Laws existed. Temples stood. Writing arrived late to the story. The monuments assumed memory that no longer existed. Stone does not rely on speech. It survives interruption. When people forget, stone waits. Memory without writing can build empires. It cannot guarantee their survival. When transmission ends, nothing replaces it immediately. Writing fills the gap slowly, recording what remains visible, not what has vanished. If Egypt inherited its greatest works, it may also have inherited their silence. The builders trusted memory. When memory failed, explanation disappeared. The result is not mystery by design. It is absence by erosion. Civilizations that write too late remember themselves only partially. What came before becomes sacred, distant, and unnamed. The greatest empire may have existed in full awareness of its knowledge, never imagining it would need to be written down. When it ended, memory ended with it. Stone endured. The silence beneath sacred ground. Beneath many of Egypt's most sacred places lies space that was never meant to be seen. Chambers sealed before use. Corridors cut, then closed. Foundations laid deeper than necessity required. These spaces do not function as tombs, storage rooms, or passages. They exist quietly, preserved by burial rather than occupation. Archaeology often focuses on what is visible: walls, reliefs, inscriptions. What lies beneath is treated as structural support or ritual symbolism. Yet in Egypt, the underground tells a different story. The silence below ground appears deliberate. At Giza, the Great Pyramid contains more empty volume than usable space. The descending passage leads deep below the plateau to an unfinished subterranean chamber carved into bedrock. It contains no decoration, no coffin, no signs of use. The chamber was abandoned mid-cut, yet the rest of the pyramid was completed with precision. The abandonment was intentional, not forced. Above it, other chambers were sealed. The so-called Queen's Chamber was never used for burial. Its shafts do not reach the exterior. They terminate behind stone blocks. In 1993, robotic exploration revealed small doors sealing these shafts, complete with copper handles. Behind them lay more stone, then another sealed space. No inscription explains their purpose. Sealed architecture requires intention. Builders do not close passages without reason. Sealing preserves something or prevents access. In this case, nothing visible was preserved, only space. The same pattern appears beneath the step pyramid at Saqqara. A vast underground complex extends for kilometers beneath the structure. Corridors branch into galleries. Niches line the walls. Many chambers were sealed immediately after construction. Some contained stone vessels from earlier periods. Others were empty. The vessels themselves raise questions. Thousands were carved from hard stone and placed underground, never to be seen again. They were not offerings meant to be accessed. They were buried permanently. No text explains why. Burial without display contradicts later Egyptian practice, where objects were meant to accompany the dead into the afterlife. These underground deposits predate that theology. Their silence suggests a different intent. At Abydos, the Osirion lies beneath the temple of Seti I. Its floor sits below the water table. Water pools around massive granite blocks arranged in a style unlike surrounding structures. The Osirion bears no inscriptions. Its construction differs from the temple above it. The temple honors Osiris, god of resurrection. The structure beneath remains unnamed. Egyptologists date the Osirian to the New Kingdom based on proximity. Yet its style appears older. Its placement beneath later sacred ground suggests reuse rather than origin. The later temple adapted to what already existed. Building atop older foundations is common in Egypt. Sacred sites were rarely abandoned. Instead, they accumulated layers. Each layer respected the one below, even when its origin was forgotten. This behavior implies inherited sanctity. Builders did not fully understand what lay beneath, but they recognized its importance. They avoided disturbance. At Karnak, deep beneath later pylons, earlier foundations run at different angles. Some are misaligned with the visible temple axis. Builders compensated rather than corrected. They treated the deeper layers as fixed. This deference suggests boundaries. Certain spaces were not meant to be altered. Sealed spaces also appear in rock-cut tombs. False doors carved into walls lead nowhere. Chambers are blocked permanently. In some cases, burial chambers were sealed and never reopened, even during later periods of reuse elsewhere. Sealing requires labor. Blocking a corridor takes time and effort. It is not accidental. When no grave robbery is expected, sealing still occurs. The purpose is not protection. It is closure. One interpretation is ritual. Space itself may have held meaning. A chamber does not need an object to be sacred. It may represent absence, containment, or transition. Another interpretation is preservation. Knowledge, objects, or functions may have been removed before sealing. What remains is the structure, not its content. If a civilization inherited sacred ground without understanding its origin, sealing becomes a way to honor without interference. Silence replaces explanation. The idea of silence as preservation appears elsewhere. In later Egyptian religion, the true name of a god was hidden. Speaking it granted power. Silence protected order. What was concealed remained potent. Underground silence fits this worldview. There are also practical implications. Underground environments preserve conditions. Temperature remains stable. Moisture is controlled. Stone weathers slowly. Sealed chambers last. If something needed to endure beyond social collapse, burial would achieve it, yet nothing visible remains. This absence suggests that preservation was not material alone. It may have been symbolic or spatial. Empty chambers still preserve form. They preserve proportion, alignment, and orientation. They preserve knowledge embedded in architecture rather than text. In this sense, underground silence becomes a record, not of events, but of intention. Later, cultures often misinterpret such spaces. Empty chambers are labeled unfinished. Sealed passages are called symbolic. Foundations are dismissed as structural necessity. These explanations assume modern priorities. An earlier society may have valued space differently. Silence may have been the point. If the greatest empire left no records, it may have relied on place rather than language, meaning resided in location, alignment, and repetition. Underground spaces held memory without words. When that society ended, later builders inherited the forms, but not the meaning. They preserved what they could not explain. This pattern is visible in the care taken to avoid disturbance. Even when stone was reused elsewhere, certain areas remained untouched. Sacred ground was respected despite ignorance. The silence beneath Egypt's temples is consistent, not random. It spans dynasties. It persists across theological shifts. It suggests a shared understanding that some things were not to be opened. Silence can be intentional. It can be protective. It can be reverent. Archaeology often seeks answers through exposure, yet some cultures preserve through concealment. Opening every space may misunderstand its purpose. If writing failed, space remained. When explanation vanished, architecture continued to communicate through restraint. The silence beneath sacred ground may be the closest surviving expression of a civilization that trusted memory, not text. When memory failed, silence endured. Stone does not speak, it holds. When later cultures took credit, when monuments survive longer than memory, ownership becomes flexible. Stones do not argue. Foundations do not object. Later cultures step into landscapes shaped by others and name what they find. Over time, attribution settles, not because it is correct, but because it is repeated. In Egypt, monuments were rarely left untouched. Sacred places attracted rebuilding. Temples rose atop temples. Shrines absorbed earlier foundations. This layering created continuity, but it also blurred origin. When a structure was repaired, rededicated, or renamed, credit shifted quietly. Royal inscriptions illustrate this process. Kings often claim to have built temples that archaeology shows were restored. Walls were resurfaced, reliefs were recarved, names were added. The original builders remained unnamed, not erased deliberately, but absorbed into a present that needed legitimacy. Legitimacy mattered. Authority in Egypt was anchored in antiquity. To rule was to align with what already existed. Claiming to restore an ancient monument connected a king to a timeless order. The past was a resource. This dynamic encourages appropriation. If a structure is old and revered, associating oneself with it strengthens power. Over generations, restoration becomes origin in memory. The pyramids offer a clear example. Khufu's name appears near the Great Pyramid, yet not on it. Later texts attribute the pyramid to him. Nearby workers' marks inside relieving chambers include his cartouche. These marks indicate organization, not authorship. They show oversight, not design. Attribution followed proximity. A king associated with a site became its owner in history. This pattern repeats across Egypt. Temples at Luxor and Karnak were expanded by multiple dynasties. Each added inscriptions claiming devotion and renewal. None explained the earliest foundations beneath. Credit accumulated upward while origins sank deeper. Renaming reinforced this process. Older structures were assigned new identities. Gods were merged. Functions were reinterpreted. A building dedicated to one deity became associated with another. Meaning shifted without demolition. When meaning shifts, origin fades. Later, Egyptians often spoke of ancestors without names. They referred to builders of the past as those who came before. This language acknowledges inheritance without clarity. It accepts benefit without explanation. Outside Egypt, similar patterns appear. In Rome, earlier Etruscan works were absorbed into Roman narratives. Roads, walls, and rituals were claimed as Roman achievements, despite earlier origins. Attribution followed power. In the Andes, the Inca incorporated massive stone foundations built by earlier cultures. They did not dismantle them, they built atop them and integrated them into imperial identity. The earlier builders were unnamed. In each case, taking credit was not deception, it was continuity. Later, cultures needed the past to function. In Egypt, this continuity was formalized through king lists. These lists begin with dynastic founders. What came before is condensed into divine reigns or omitted. The list creates order by naming only what fits. Monuments that predated the list were absorbed into it by association. A structure near a king's reign became his by default. Over time, this association hardened into fact. This process explains inconsistencies. Some monuments attributed to known kings show construction methods inconsistent with their period. Others lack inscriptions entirely. Attribution persists anyway. The absence of contradiction matters. Egyptian scribes did not question inherited credit, they recorded tradition. Once a structure belonged to a name, it stayed there. Language reinforces this. Hieroglyphic texts often describe kings as founders, even when archaeology shows restoration. The word did not require literal creation. It meant renewal, claim, stewardship. Over centuries, stewardship becomes origin. This has implications for a civilization that left no records. Its works would be claimed by successors. Its identity would dissolve into later histories. What remained would be structure without author. The process would be gradual. Early successors might know the truth, but choose silence. Later generations would inherit attribution without question. Eventually, memory would align fully with inscription. By the time modern historians arrive, attribution appears settled. There are moments where this process becomes visible. In some inscriptions, kings boast of restoring monuments whose builders were unknown. This admission is rare and revealing. It suggests that even within Egyptian memory, origins were sometimes unclear. Rather than investigate, the response was reverence. Unknown builders were honored through maintenance, not inquiry. Inquiry threatens continuity. Naming uncertainty destabilizes authority. It is safer to accept inheritance without explanation. This cultural choice preserves monuments, but erases authors. Modern archaeology often accepts ancient attribution unless strong evidence contradicts it. In Egypt, contradiction is subtle. Precision appears early, methods disappear, credit remains. If a greater, earlier civilization existed, its works would be absorbed seamlessly. Later, Egyptians would not see themselves as impostors, they would see themselves as caretakers. Caretakers do not question origin, they maintain. This explains why later Egyptians rarely attempted to replicate early precision. They did not see themselves as inventors, they saw themselves as heirs. Inheritance can preserve form while losing function. The shell remains, the method fades. Attribution survives because it is useful. Over time, usefulness becomes truth. The idea that later cultures took credit is not an accusation. It is a pattern of human behavior. History prefers continuity over uncertainty. Naming fills silence. When writing appears after creation, it assigns ownership retroactively. What is written last often defines what is remembered. In Egypt, writing solidified a narrative that had already forgotten its beginning. The monuments accepted the names given to them. Stone does not correct. If the greatest empire left no records, it would live on through appropriation. Its works would be praised under other names. Its absence would never be noticed because its presence was overwhelming. Only when patterns are compared does the silence emerge. Attribution answers the question of who. It does not answer how. Credit closes inquiry. Once a builder is named, investigation ends. The stones remain precise. The methods remain missing. The names remain convenient. In this way, later cultures did not steal history. They inherited it incomplete. The past did not vanish. It was renamed. Evidence that does not fit the story. Most historical narratives survive because the evidence aligns neatly enough to be arranged. Dates correspond. Materials match expectations. Methods follow progression. When evidence does not fit, it is often labeled anomalous, symbolic, or unresolved. In Egypt, such evidence is not rare. It is persistent. Measurements provide the first disruption. The Great Pyramid's proportions follow consistent mathematical relationships. The ratio of its perimeter to twice its height closely approximates pi. Its slope angle aligns with simple fractional ratios that produce stable geometry. These relationships are not required for burial, symbolism, or monumentality. They reflect planning grounded in abstract measurement. No surviving Egyptian text describes these relationships in architectural terms. Mathematics is documented in papyri, but primarily for accounting, land division, and grain calculation. The geometry embedded in the pyramid exceeds what these texts describe. The knowledge implied by the structure does not appear in writing. Orientation presents another inconsistency. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north with remarkable accuracy. This alignment was achieved without magnetic reference. It required astronomical observation. Several methods are proposed, including stellar alignment using circumpolar stars, yet no Egyptian text explains such a procedure. Later, temples were aligned less precisely. If alignment knowledge improved over time, accuracy would increase. Instead, it declines. Stone working marks add to the problem. Drill holes in granite show consistent spiral striations. Saw marks indicate straight, deep cuts through hard stone. Petrie measured these features in the 19th century and noted feed rates inconsistent with known hand-powered copper tools. He did not speculate beyond recording the data. Later explanations emphasize labor over method. Time replaces technique, yet time leaves irregularity. Many surfaces show uniformity that suggests controlled processes rather than extended abrasion. Core samples extracted from granite blocks show smooth internal walls. The drilling appears tubular rather than pecked. No surviving tool matches this result. Experimental reconstructions produce similar shapes only with modern equipment. Another anomaly lies in erosion patterns. The body of the Sphinx shows rounded weathering consistent with prolonged rainfall. Egypt's climate has been arid for at least 5,000 years. Geological studies suggest that the erosion predates dynastic Egypt. The head shows less erosion, implying reworking. If correct, this places the Sphinx's core earlier than accepted chronology. The monument was inherited, reshaped, and reinterpreted. Egyptian texts do not mention its construction. This absence is notable. The Sphinx was associated with royal power and solar worship. Later, kings restored it. None claim to have built it. Underground voids introduce further inconsistency. Beneath the Giza Plateau, cavities exist that were deliberately cut and sealed. They contain no inscriptions. Some are structurally unnecessary. Their purpose is unclear. They were not reused. Silence persists. At Saqqara, thousands of stone vessels were found buried beneath the Step Pyramid complex. Many were carved from hard stone with high precision. They were placed underground and sealed. Their craftsmanship exceeds that of later dynastic examples. Their burial precludes display. If these vessels were ritual objects, their concealment contradicts later Egyptian practices of visible offering. Their presence underground suggests a different cultural logic. Transport logistics also strain explanation. Granite blocks weighing tens of tons were moved hundreds of kilometers. Later, Egyptians documented transport of large stones with teams, sledges, and lubrication. These methods struggle to scale to the largest blocks used earlier. No ramps survive that match required dimensions. Ramp theories proliferate. Straight ramps, zigzag ramps, internal ramps. Each solves some problems and introduces others. None are described in texts. None leave clear archaeological traces proportional to their size. Precision without documentation is unusual. Egyptian culture recorded mundane details extensively. Workers' names survive. Bread rations are listed, yet the most complex processes are unmentioned. Astronomical correlations add complexity. The layout of the Giza pyramids has been compared to the stars of Orion's belt. While debated, the alignment roughly matches the belt's configuration, as seen around 2500 BCE or earlier. Egyptian religion associated Orion with Osiris, god of the afterlife. If intentional, this implies sky-ground mapping at monumental scale. No text describes such planning. Later temples reference stars symbolically, not architecturally. Numerical repetition appears across sites. Certain ratios recur. Certain dimensions align with whole number relationships. These patterns suggest standardized measurement systems. Yet, no standard unit survives that explains them fully. The royal cubit is known, but applying it does not resolve all ratios cleanly. Some dimensions imply subdivisions not documented. Cultural behavior also conflicts with accepted timelines. Early dynastic art shows refined craftsmanship. Later periods show stylistic exaggeration and abstraction. This does not align with a linear development model. Writing itself appears late relative to complexity. Hieroglyphs emerge after organized settlement, long-distance trade, and monumental building. Writing records what exists. It does not initiate it. This sequence mirrors other ancient cultures. In the Indus Valley, advanced urban planning appears with minimal inscriptions. At Göbekli Tepe, monumental stone circles predate agriculture. Complexity appears before text. Such patterns challenge assumptions rather than provide answers. Mainstream archaeology often resolves anomalies by isolating them. Each is addressed separately. Erosion is geological. Alignment is ritual. Precision is labor. Absence of text is coincidence. Yet when viewed together, a pattern emerges. The pattern suggests inheritance. Evidence that does not fit may belong to a context not represented in surviving records. When a civilization leaves no writing, its evidence resists narrative. Egyptian history is constructed from what was written, not from everything that happened. Writing defines visibility. What predates it appears anomalous by default. If the greatest empire left no records, its presence would appear only through contradictions, precision without explanation, scale without documentation, continuity without origin. Anomalies do not argue. They persist. Modern interpretation often seeks closure. Assigning anomalies to error or coincidence stabilizes narrative, but stability does not equal accuracy. The stones remain unchanged. Measurements remain measurable. Erosion remains visible. Silence remains silent. Evidence that does not fit is not necessarily false. It may belong to a story not preserved. Egypt's monuments do not contradict history. They exceed it. They point to capacity without language. They suggest that what is remembered is incomplete. Stone does not revise itself to match narrative. It preserves what was done, not what was said. If history relies on writing, anything built before writing will always appear anomalous. The evidence does not demand a new story. It quietly indicates that the existing one is partial. What does not fit may not be error. It may be residue. The silence remains. The limits of accepted timelines. Timelines give history structure. They divide before from after. They assign cause and sequence. Without them, events blur. In archaeology, timelines are built from layers, artifacts, and comparison. They are adjusted as evidence accumulates. Yet once accepted, they become frameworks that shape interpretation rather than respond to it. In Egypt, the accepted timeline places the rise of complex society shortly before 3000 BCE. Writing appears, kings are named, monumental construction accelerates. Everything before this point is labeled pre-dynastic. The label implies preparation rather than completion. This framing creates a boundary. On one side lies history. On the other lies prehistory. Evidence found beyond the boundary is interpreted cautiously, often minimally. Complexity before writing is treated as exceptional rather than foundational. Radiocarbon dating reinforces this structure, but it also has limits. Organic material is required. Stone cannot be dated directly. When monumental stone structures lack associated organic remains, their age is inferred from context. Context depends on surrounding layers, reuse, and later occupation. At sites like Giza, this creates ambiguity. The pyramids sit on bedrock. Later settlements cluster nearby. Organic remains belong to later activity. Dating becomes indirect. Attribution follows proximity rather than certainty. The timeline stabilizes because it is internally consistent. It does not easily accommodate interruption. Yet interruption appears repeatedly. Geological data indicates climate shifts long before dynastic Egypt. The Sahara was once green. Rivers flowed where desert now lies. Human occupation moved with water. These changes altered settlement patterns over millennia. If a complex society existed during a wetter phase, its remains would be scattered, eroded, or buried. Its end might coincide with environmental transition rather than political collapse. Writing may never have developed or survived. Accepted timelines often compress these deep transitions. They privilege continuity where disruption may have occurred. Egyptian myth preserves hints of disruption. Floods recur, ages end. Order must be restored. These stories are symbolic, but symbolism often preserves memory without detail. The timeline treats these myths as theology rather than history. This choice narrows interpretation. Stratigraphy, another pillar of dating, assumes orderly deposition. Yet human activity disrupts layers. Construction cuts through earlier deposits. Later, rebuilding mixes material. Sacred sites are reused repeatedly. Layers blur. At Saqqara and Abydos, early material appears beneath later monuments. Some of it is reburied intentionally. The act of burial removes it from stratigraphic clarity. Dating becomes interpretive. Accepted timelines resolve ambiguity by selecting dominant patterns. Minor inconsistencies are absorbed. Persistent ones are labeled unresolved. The problem is not error, it is scale. Timelines function best over centuries. Over millennia, loss accumulates. Oral memory collapses. Material erodes. Writing appears late. What remains is uneven. When a civilization leaves no records, its time does not disappear cleanly. It fragments. Pieces appear too early, too precise, or too isolated. Timelines struggle to place them. Egypt's pre-dynastic period already shows complexity. Large settlements existed, trade networks extended far beyond the Nile. Stoneworking traditions were established. Ritual sites were aligned astronomically. These features are not experimental, they are mature, yet the timeline treats them as precursors rather than products. This approach assumes progress is linear. It assumes that writing, kingship, and monumentality must arise together. Evidence suggests otherwise. Writing often appears after administration becomes too complex to remember. Kingship formalizes after authority consolidates. Monumentality can precede both. If complexity existed earlier, the timeline compresses it into preparation rather than recognition. Chronology also depends on king lists. These lists begin with dynastic founders. Earlier periods are summarized or mythologized. The lists create a clean beginning that may not reflect reality. Once codified, this beginning anchors all subsequent dating. Questioning it destabilizes everything that follows. As a result, anomalies are treated as local rather than systemic. Each inconsistency is addressed individually. The structure remains intact. Yet when anomalies cluster around the same periods, the structure itself may require adjustment. The limits of accepted timelines become visible at their edges. When precision appears too early, when erosion predates climate models, when methods exceed documentation, when silence persists where explanation is expected, these limits do not invalidate archaeology. They define its scope. Timelines are tools, not truths. They are models built from surviving evidence. When evidence is missing, models fill gaps cautiously. A civilization without records leaves gaps that cannot be filled directly. Its time must be inferred indirectly. This inference remains provisional. In Egypt, provisional conclusions have hardened into certainty through repetition. Textbooks stabilize narratives. Museums label exhibits. Public understanding follows. Revising timelines is difficult because it affects everything connected to them. Dates shift. Relationships change. Interpretations unravel. This inertia favors conservative models. Yet archaeology evolves. Göbekli Tepe forced revision of assumptions about agriculture and ritual. The site predates farming, yet shows organized monumental construction. Accepted timelines expanded reluctantly. Similar expansion may be required elsewhere. Egypt's deep past may extend beyond its written history in ways not yet integrated. The limits of accepted timelines may conceal rather than reveal that depth. Recognizing limits does not require replacing narratives. It requires loosening them. When evidence does not fit, it may belong outside the frame. If the greatest empire left no records, its time would resist placement. It would appear too early, too advanced, or too silent. Timelines would brush against it without containing it. This friction is visible in Egypt's stone record. Precision appears before explanation. Complexity appears before writing. Decline follows documentation. The sequence is inverted relative to expectation. Accepted timelines accommodate this inversion by redefining significance. Early complexity becomes exception. Later, simplicity becomes variation. Another approach is to widen the frame. A wider timeline would allow for rise, peak, and collapse before writing. It would accept that memory failed completely. It would treat later civilizations as inheritors rather than originators. Such a model remains speculative, but it aligns with evidence patterns. The absence of records does not imply absence of time. It implies absence of survival. Timelines privilege what survives. What does not survive still occurred. Egypt's monuments may sit at the edge of an older chronology, one that has not been fully integrated because it left no text to anchor it. The limits of accepted timelines are not boundaries of truth. They are boundaries of evidence. Beyond them lies silence shaped into stone, the question that remains unanswered. Centuries of study have narrowed many uncertainties about ancient Egypt. Dates have been refined, dynasties ordered, texts translated. Yet beneath this clarity, a smaller set of questions persists. These questions do not disappear with excavation. They deepen with familiarity. They remain unanswered, not because evidence is absent, but because it does not resolve cleanly. One such question concerns origin. Not the origin of kingship or writing, but the origin of capability. How did precision appear so early, then diminish? How did methods implied by stone precede the methods described by text? These questions are acknowledged quietly, then set aside. Archaeology often advances by accumulation. One artifact adds context to another. Over time, patterns emerge. In Egypt, the pattern is uneven. Some capabilities appear fully developed at their first appearance. Others never exceed an early peak. This irregularity resists linear explanation. When faced with resistance, scholarship often reframes the question. Instead of asking how something was done, it asks whether it needed to be done at all. Precision becomes symbolic. Alignment becomes ritual. Engineering becomes labor. These reframings reduce tension, but do not eliminate it. The Great Pyramid continues to anchor this uncertainty. It is not unique in size alone, but in completeness. It integrates surveying, logistics, geometry, and material handling into a single, unified outcome. Each component functions without visible redundancy. No later structure replicates this integration. The question is not whether Egyptians were capable. They clearly were. The question is whether the capability recorded in the pyramid reflects a process fully understood by those who followed. Egyptian texts never describe a moment of invention. There is no account of learning to build pyramids. There is no narrative of trial, error, and success. The form appears established. In other fields, Egyptians recorded innovation readily. Medical papyri describe treatments and diagnoses. Legal texts outline procedures. Religious hymns evolve visibly over time. Architecture alone lacks this developmental narrative. This absence invites interpretation. One possibility is loss. The records may have existed and vanished. Papyrus decays. Archives burn. Floods erase. Over millennia, entire libraries can disappear. Yet loss alone does not explain selective silence. Other technical knowledge survived. Another possibility is separation. The knowledge required to build early monuments may not have been part of scribal culture. Builders may have transmitted methods orally within closed groups. Scribes recorded outcomes, not processes. When those groups dissolved, knowledge vanished without entering text. This would explain why later Egyptians revered earlier structures without replicating them. Reverence does not require understanding. There is also the possibility of displacement. Capabilities may have originated elsewhere and arrived already developed. Egypt's geography favored convergence. The Nile connected distant regions. Trade routes extended into Africa, the Levant, and beyond. Ideas can travel faster than texts. If techniques arrive complete, Egyptians may have adopted them without recording their origin. Over time, origin would be forgotten. Attribution would localize. This does not require an external civilization of mythic scale. It requires only movement and time. Yet even this explanation leaves gaps. The consistency of early precision across multiple sites suggests internal coherence rather than borrowed fragments. The system appears unified. Another unanswered question concerns intent. Why were certain spaces sealed? Why were chambers left empty? Why were objects buried permanently? These actions required effort without visible return. Later, Egyptian religion emphasized provision for the afterlife. Objects were meant to be used by the dead. Early sealed spaces do not follow this logic. Their purpose remains unclear. Intent is difficult to recover without text. Archaeology infers function from pattern. When pattern diverges, inference weakens. The same applies to chronology. Dating relies on association. When associations are ambiguous, timelines stabilize around convention. Convention becomes default. Default becomes fact. This process leaves some questions unresolved, because resolving them would require reordering too much. Another unanswered question concerns continuity. Egyptian civilization lasted thousands of years. It adapted, declined, recovered, and transformed. Yet the transition from pre-dynastic to dynastic appears abrupt in the record. Writing appears. Kings are named. Monumental building accelerates. What bridged this transition? The archaeological record shows continuity of settlement. Cultural practices overlap. Yet administrative complexity seems to arrive suddenly. This suggests preparation unrecorded. If preparation occurred without writing, its disappearance would leave a gap precisely where explanation is needed most. The question then becomes whether absence of evidence is evidence of absence. In most cases, archaeology avoids this inference. In Egypt, it is often implied implicitly. The unanswered questions persist because they sit at the boundary between material and narrative. Material evidence suggests one sequence. Narrative frameworks suggest another. Reconciling them requires adjustment on one side. Modern scholarship tends to adjust interpretation rather than framework. Symbols absorb anomalies. Labor explains precision. Ritual explains alignment. Silence explains silence. These explanations are plausible. They are also cumulative. Each resolves a detail without addressing the pattern. Patterns matter because they suggest structure beyond coincidence. The pattern in Egypt is not mystery. It is asymmetry. Early works are strong. Later works are weaker. Documentation increases as capability declines. Attribution solidifies as understanding fades. This inversion is uncomfortable. It implies that writing did not preserve peak knowledge. It followed its erosion. The question that remains unanswered is whether this inversion is real or illusory. Answering it requires acknowledging that some civilizations may peak before they record themselves. That memory may fail completely. That writing may arrive too late. If so, then Egypt's earliest monuments are not anomalies within its history. They are survivors of a history that ended before Egypt began to write. This possibility remains speculative because it cannot be confirmed directly. The civilization, if it existed, left no records, only stone. Stone does not name itself. It does not date itself. It does not explain itself. The unanswered question persists because the evidence does not resolve into certainty. It suggests, implies, and resists. Scholars can describe the pyramids in detail. They can measure, map, and model. They can reconstruct labor forces and seasonal rhythms. Yet the moment of origin remains beyond reach. Why this form, at this time, with this precision? The question is not dramatic. It does not demand revelation. It sits quietly beneath accepted knowledge. History often advances by answering questions. Sometimes it advances by recognizing which questions cannot yet be answered. Egypt's monuments continue to function as prompts rather than conclusions. They invite measurement rather than closure. The greatest empire, if it left no records, would leave behind this condition. Persistent clarity paired with persistent uncertainty. The stones would endure. The question would remain. Inheritance without memory. Civilizations rarely begin on empty ground. They inherit landscapes shaped by others, routines established earlier, and structures whose purposes are assumed rather than understood. Inheritance does not require comprehension. It requires continuity. In Egypt, continuity was preserved even as memory thinned. When later Egyptians encountered monuments older than their records, they did not dismantle them, they incorporated them. Foundations were respected, alignments were maintained, sacred geography persisted. This behavior suggests inheritance without explanation. The forms mattered even when the reasons did not. Inheritance operates quietly. A structure becomes a landmark becomes sacred. Sacred places attract ritual. Ritual repeats. Over generations, repetition replaces origin. The place is known for what it is used for, not for why it exists. Egyptian temples exemplify this process. Many were rebuilt multiple times on the same footprint. Walls were thickened, columns multiplied, reliefs were refreshed. Beneath each phase lay earlier stone, sometimes cut at different angles, sometimes composed of larger blocks. Builders adjusted to what they found, rather than replacing it. This adjustment implies constraint. Certain elements were not negotiable. They had to be worked around. Memory without writing relies on practice. Practice preserves action, not explanation. When explanation fades, action persists until it becomes habit. Habit becomes tradition. Tradition becomes law. In Egypt, tradition governed orientation, proportion, and placement. Temples faced specific directions. Axes aligned with celestial events. These choices were repeated even when original reasons were no longer articulated. The correctness of the action mattered more than its rationale. This is inheritance without memory. Architectural inheritance also explains decline without collapse. If methods are transmitted by imitation, errors accumulate. Small deviations compound. Over time, results diverge from originals. The shape remains recognizable. The precision does not. Later, Egyptian pyramids demonstrate this. Builders followed, established forms, but lacked the underlying principles. Internal chambers simplified, cores weakened, casings thinned. The pyramid remained a pyramid, but it no longer functioned as before. Inheritance preserves identity while losing capability. Social inheritance follows a similar pattern. Authority is passed down with symbols rather than skills. Titles endure, offices remain, functions change. A priest may perform rites whose origins are forgotten. The rite remains valid because it is recognized, not because it is understood. Egyptian religion reflects this. Gods merged, names changed, attributes shifted. Yet temples continued to operate. Ritual calendars persisted. Continuity mattered more than coherence. This dynamic stabilizes society. It also obscures origins. When writing became widespread, it recorded the present state of inheritance. It did not recover what had already been lost. Texts describe gods as eternal and kings as restorers. They rarely describe beginnings. Beginnings are dangerous. They invite questions. Inheritance without memory also explains selective preservation. Certain spaces were sealed rather than repurposed. Certain foundations were left untouched. These choices suggest respect for limits not fully understood. Limits can be inherited like laws. A boundary persists because crossing it feels wrong, not because anyone remembers why it exists. At Giza, later construction avoided disturbing specific areas. Quarrying was selective. Some stones were reused extensively, others remained untouched. The pattern does not align neatly with convenience. It aligns with caution. Caution implies inheritance of taboo. In oral cultures, taboo preserves knowledge by restricting access. When knowledge is lost, taboo persists without explanation. The restriction remains effective even when its purpose is forgotten. This mechanism could preserve structures long after their meaning vanished. Inheritance without memory also complicates attribution. When a later king repairs a monument, his name becomes associated with it. Over time, association becomes ownership. Ownership becomes authorship. The original builders disappear behind continuity. This is not deception, it is normalization. In Egypt, normalization was formalized. King lists organized time. Monuments were folded into dynastic narratives. What predated the list was condensed into myth. The process simplified history into manageable form. Simplification is necessary for governance. It is costly for accuracy. If a prior civilization existed and collapsed before writing, its works would enter this process fully. They would be normalized, renamed, and preserved as part of a new order. Their memory would be structural, not textual. This explains why later Egyptians treated certain monuments as eternal. Eternity replaces origin when origin is unknown. The concept of ma'at, order, governed Egyptian thought. Order was not created, it was maintained. Kings restored balance. Priests upheld cycles. Innovation was framed as renewal. In such a system, asking who built something first is less important than ensuring it continues to function symbolically. Inheritance without memory fits this worldview. It also explains why anomalies persist without resolution. When inheritance is complete, questions lose urgency. A monument does not need an explanation to be used. It needs alignment with tradition. Modern archaeology seeks explanation. Ancient societies sought continuity. This difference creates tension. Where modern inquiry asks how and when, ancient practice asked whether and where. The questions do not overlap perfectly. Inheritance can also mask rupture. A collapse may occur without visible destruction if successors step into the space left behind. Structures remain occupied. Rituals continue. Only knowledge disappears. From the outside, continuity appears unbroken. From within, something has changed. Egypt's long duration suggests resilience. Yet resilience can coexist with amnesia. The earliest dynastic Egyptians inherited a landscape already monumental. They inherited alignments already fixed. They inherited techniques partially intact. Over time, they formalized what they inherited through writing and ritual. What they did not inherit was the full explanation. This condition is visible in the language of reverence. Ancient builders are praised without being named. The past is honored without being described. Age itself becomes authority. Age without memory produces sanctity. Sanctity discourages investigation. To question is to disturb. Thus, inheritance without memory perpetuates silence. The stones continue to function as anchors of identity. They ground tradition. They provide legitimacy. They connect generations. They do not explain themselves. If the greatest empire left no records, it may have succeeded too well in embedding itself into the landscape. Its works became indispensable. Its presence became normal. Its absence went unnoticed. Only when modern observers attempt to reconstruct origins does the silence become visible. Inheritance is powerful because it does not require understanding. It requires acceptance. Egypt accepted its monuments. It maintained them. It adapted them. It spoke of them as eternal. In doing so, it preserved a past it could not recall. The result is a civilization that appears to have created what it inherited. Stone allows this illusion. It outlasts explanation. Inheritance without memory is not failure. It is survival without narrative. The monuments remain. The builders remain unnamed. What endures is form, not voice. What silence allows us to consider. Silence in history is often treated as a problem to be solved. Missing records invite speculation. Gaps provoke discomfort. The instinct is to fill them quickly, to restore continuity. Yet silence can also function as information. It defines limits. It marks boundaries where certainty ends and interpretation begins. In Egypt, silence appears not as absence everywhere, but as absence in specific places. It gathers around origins, methods, and transitions. It leaves names intact while removing explanations. This pattern suggests not random loss, but selective survival. Acknowledging silence changes how evidence is approached. Instead of forcing material into fixed narratives, it allows the material to shape the questions. Precision without documentation becomes meaningful rather than inconvenient. Early complexity without text becomes significant rather than anomalous. Silence permits reconsideration of assumptions. One such assumption is that writing is necessary for advanced organization. Egypt challenges this. Monumental construction, coordinated labor, and standardized measurement appear before extensive writing. Writing follows consolidation, not initiation. Another assumption concerns progress. The expectation that societies improve steadily over time frames decline as failure. In Egypt, decline appears without collapse. Capability diminishes while continuity persists. Silence allows the possibility that loss can be gradual and incomplete. When silence is accepted, the past becomes layered rather than linear. Multiple phases can exist without clear boundaries. A civilization can peak, fragment, and be absorbed without leaving a textual trace. Its presence would be felt through residue rather than record. Residue includes orientation, proportion, placement, and restraint. These features persist even when explanation does not. They become habits inherited by later builders. Habit does not require memory. Silence also permits restraint in interpretation. Not every anomaly requires resolution. Some remain unresolved because evidence is insufficient, not because explanation is forbidden. Accepting this prevents overreach. Modern scholarship often seeks closure. Dates are fixed, attributions assigned, questions narrowed. Silence resists closure. It reminds that certainty is provisional. This does not weaken history. It strengthens it by defining where knowledge ends. Silence allows comparison across cultures. When similar patterns appear elsewhere, silence gains context. Early monumental building without writing occurs in multiple regions. Loss of technique without loss of form appears repeatedly. These parallels suggest broader human patterns rather than isolated mysteries. Silence allows recognition of vulnerability. Knowledge is not permanent. Transmission can fail. Societies can forget essential methods while preserving symbols. Writing does not guarantee preservation. It records selectively. This recognition reframes Egypt not as an exception, but as a case study. Its longevity magnifies patterns that occur elsewhere more briefly. Silence also allows humility. The impulse to explain everything assumes completeness of evidence. Acknowledging silence admits limitation. It accepts that some aspects of the past may remain inaccessible. Such humility is not resignation, it is accuracy. Silence invites interdisciplinary consideration. Archaeology alone may not resolve certain questions. Geology, astronomy, anthropology, and material science contribute perspectives. When they converge without explanation, silence deepens rather than disappears. This convergence appears in Egypt. Geological erosion, astronomical alignment, architectural precision, and textual absence intersect. None alone overturn accepted narrative. Together, they complicate them. Silence allows the possibility that accepted timelines are approximations rather than absolutes. They organize evidence effectively, but may not capture full depth. Expanding timelines does not erase existing history. It contextualizes it. Acknowledging silence also affects how monuments are perceived. They become records in themselves rather than illustrations of texts. Stone is treated as primary evidence, not supplementary. This shift changes emphasis. Instead of asking what monuments represent symbolically, inquiry asks what they require practically. The requirements imply knowledge that may not survive in writing. Silence allows us to consider that some civilizations may have chosen not to write extensively. Writing is a cultural choice, not an inevitability. Oral systems can sustain complexity for long periods. Their failure leaves little trace. If a civilization relied on memory and practice rather than text, its collapse would erase its narrative almost entirely. Only durable materials would remain. In such a case, later societies would inherit outcomes without causes. They would preserve structures while inventing explanations or accepting none. Egypt's reverence for antiquity supports this. Age itself conferred authority. Unknown builders were honored through maintenance. Silence was compatible with respect. This compatibility suggests that silence was not always perceived as a problem. It became one only when modern inquiry demanded origin. Silence also permits reconsideration of attribution. Names attached to monuments may reflect stewardship rather than creation. This possibility does not negate historical figures. It reframes their roles. Reframing roles does not diminish achievement. It clarifies context. Silence allows for multiplicity. Multiple explanations can coexist provisionally. Labor-intensive methods may explain some features. Inherited techniques may explain others. Environmental factors may account for decline. No single cause must dominate. This multiplicity resists simplification. It preserves complexity. Silence also encourages patience. Some questions may remain unresolved until new methods emerge. Technologies change, dating improves, subsurface exploration advances. Evidence may surface slowly. Until then, silence maintains space for future discovery. The greatest risk of silence is denial. Ignoring it leads to forced narratives. Accepting it keeps inquiry open. In Egypt, silence has endured for millennia. It has not prevented study. It has shaped it. Modern understanding benefits from acknowledging where interpretation ends. This boundary does not mark ignorance. It marks honesty. Silence allows us to consider that history is incomplete by nature. Survival of evidence is uneven. What endures shapes narrative disproportionately. This awareness reframes certainty as provisional. It encourages revision without urgency. Silence does not demand belief in lost empires. It permits consideration of loss without myth. It allows complexity without speculation. What silence ultimately allows is proportion. Evidence is weighed according to presence and absence. Both inform understanding. In Egypt, presence is monumental. Absence is contextual. Together, they describe a civilization that inherited, preserved, and transformed more than it recorded. Whether a greater empire preceded it remains unproven. What is clear is that some capabilities appeared before documentation and declined afterward. Silence accommodates this observation without requiring final explanation. The stones remain aligned, the chambers remain sealed, the methods remain unstated. Silence persists not as mystery, but as condition. It marks the edge of what can be known from what survives. Within that edge, interpretation proceeds carefully. Beyond it, speculation yields to restraint. History advances not only by filling gaps, but by respecting them. What silence allows us to consider is not certainty, but scope. The past is wider than its records. Stone endures, words fade. Between them, silence remains. If you found calm in this exploration, consider subscribing for more slow, reflective history. Like the video if this style helps you unwind. and let the next chapter play as the night continues.